Judge ready? Partners ready?
Yes.
Opponents ready? Okay.
Yes.
As a content, we stand in clear negation of resolve. In United States public K-12 schools, the probable cause standard ought to apply to searches of students. New Jersey versus TLO 1985 established that within schools, student searches are to be conducted under the reasonable suspicion standard rather than the conventional probable cause standard used for adults. This reasonable suspicion standard is lower than that of probable cause and does not require warrants. Today's debate will exemplify why the reasonable suspicion standard should remain as a standard for school searches. We will first like to provide the following definition to the word ought in the resolution. Ought implies feasibility. Ms. Rossi explains what ought to be done is always thought capable of being brought upon, and I cannot concede that I ought to do anything which at the same time I judge that I cannot do. This places the burden on the affirmative to prove feasibility for all other counts, and because without feasibility they cannot quantify benefits, and thus today lose today's debate. My first contention, Judge, is student safety. Under probable cause standards, student safety is threatened and lies are lost. Subpoint A is anonymous tips. First, anonymous tips can justify a search on the reason of suspicion. Attorney Mika Schwartzback argues that anonymous tip can provide law enforcement with reasonable suspicion. Under a probable cause standard, acting on anonymous tips will be curtailed because tips alone are insufficient evidence of probable cause. The Legal Risk Management Institute finds that a mere anonymous tip does not constitute probable cause. This is problematic because anonymous tips are essential to preventing mass shootings and violence. The University of Colorado supports this by saying tips resulted in 324 suicide interventions and 28 prevented school attacks. My second subpoint B is proliferating narcotics use or drugs. Applying probable cause to school searches is going to increase the use of drugs. First, it makes it harder for school officers to effectively search drugs. The St. Louis Law School finds that resource officers would not know which legal standard applies to the search, and an officer must either conduct a search and risk having evidence suppressed or risk the safety of students. This is problematic because drug use kills about 200,000 people each year, and people who need money to finance their habit at tremendous cost to their country. Subpoint C is cyberbullying. Monica Desir finds that cyberbullying jumped from 14.5% to 21.2% in the past year. This is important because cyberbullying is caused with mass violence. Julie Laria qualifies this in 2014. A new study found that victims of bullying are already as twice as likely to carry guns and other weapons at school when they are cyberbullied. The impact of these arguments are twofold. Number one, reasonable suspicion is key to reducing mass violence stemming from cyberbullying, narcotics users, and explained in anonymous tips. Two, the economy does significantly better off where reasonable suspicion prevents cyberbullying and the use of narcotics is suppressed. Contention 2 is deterrence, Judge. Implementing a probable cause standard neutralizes deterrence. First, a reasonable suspicion standard deters students from bringing contraband to school. Benjamin Taylor argues it is necessary to apply the reasonable suspicion standard to deter students, and they will be less likely to carry contraband onto school property. And a probable cause standard not only takes away deterrence, it also exacerbates violence. University of Colorado Law Review finds that researchers argue that implementing such measures increases misbehavior and crime. This is problematic because under probable cause, studies expect at least one illegal firearm in schools every day across the U.S. Marcia and Corbett report a handgun has been discovered in the possession of a child more than once a school day, and the impact of this is twofold. Number one, without deterrence from the reasonable suspicion, it will be impossible to prevent violence at its source, and number two, gun violence will increase dramatically in schools, and thousands of lives will be lost annually. My third and last contention, Judge, is infeasibility. Implementing a probable cause standard is infeasible in public schools across the nation. First, school budgets are already stretched. Sally Wheel explains this by saying nearly half of school budgets were in either critical or very serious states. At schools, there have been job losses and A-level courses being scrapped. This is a problem because training SROs or school resource officers to follow probable cause and implementing SROs costs a monumental amount. A Cleveland State University quantifies this by saying the price of a guard in every school can reach $23 billion. And these SROs are the only ones trained in probable cause. Impossible to this is very impossible to implement, thereby avoiding any benefits on the affirmative. This goes with our framework, which means that we automatically win if they do not answer this, which is why, Judge, you should vote for the con team at the end of the day because the benefits outweigh the harms. Thank you, Judge.
I'm David first speaker for pro. Opponents ready?
Yes.
Judge ready? Partner ready?
Yes.
Okay. Starting now. Okay, our framework sets around the need of human rights. Whoever violates human rights lose this debate. My first contention is students' lives. The reasonable suspicion standard set today is today's school sets around the bar too far low in terms of how students are treated. Currently, students are under several violations of their rights that ultimately harm both the students' lives and the school. Subpoint A, privacy. This first subpoint is about student privacy. The status quo gives students too few rights, violating their privacy. James Sprung of Emory University explains in 2011. The governmental interest in searching cell phones justifies a standard for far less than the normal Fourth Amendment requirements. The interest now falls short of the heightened privacy students expect in their cell phones. Schools' interests do not justify the low standards established by the TLO court. The balance has changed, and the TLO standard has is insufficient to protect students' rights. As if this wasn't bad enough to on its own, the blatant violation of privacy also opens the door for more violations of basic constitutional rights. Matthew Lynch argues in 2006, constitutional rights of students may dilute the constitutional rights of all Americans. The impact of such dilutions of Fourth Amendment rights produce a domino effect of these revisions reverberate throughout the Fourth Amendment law. This impact is that students' moral rights and basic human rights are being violated, and this is important. Human rights are the backbone of our society and how people live today. Violating human rights is the impact of destroying society, destroying lives of the people in the society. So point B, power. The reasonable suspicion standard currently also opens up the door to immerse violation of power by school authorities. This has happened before. According to Laura Colby, writing for the Bloomberg, a group of filed formal letters of complaint against charter schools opening K through 12 incorporated alleging violations for including misuse of public funds and breaches of student privacy rights. The letter said student records, including special educational status, physical, psychological reports that family economic status was also available to individuals who shouldn't be permitted to see them on the school's platform. Now I'll move on to contention 2, distrust of authority. The current low standard for student searches causes students to distrust authority figures, harming the rule of law. The Harvard Law Review notes, the fact that schools are educating young citizenship is the reason for scrupulous protection of constitutional freedoms. We are not to strangle the free mind of it at its source and teach the youth to discount the important principles of our government, free mind at its source, and teach youth to teach students in poor communities that Constitution allows the privacy to be invaded. This is troubling, and this is very important for our society. Countries that have respect for rule of law is democratic and open, but it must apply to all races. According to several authors of the American Bar Association, the rule of law has been inextricably linked to good of the society as a whole. Interdependent with democracy, respect of rule of law are quintessentially linked with society where rule of law is equally applied to everyone. Historically, the move of oligarchy to democracy has been associated with development of the rule of law. Open governments and fair application of rule of law is closely linked together. Finally, a probable cause standard would help students promote. A cause standard will help the democratic socialization and respect of the law. Thank you.
Yeah, it's Crossfire. I'm setting a timer for 3 minutes. Sorry, my partner is actually.
It's fine.
Okay. Okay, start now. Okay, so you said apparently privacy can kill people if we have reasonable suspicion. Is that correct? In the contentions?
Yes, it could.
Okay, 2 things. First, compared to our impact of saying that probable, reasonable suspicion can save lives from people not using drugs, people getting cyberbullied, and not to mention some other things in our third contention, which is killing lives. How does that compare to you violating some privacy, and how does that kill people?
Okay, privacy is a constitutional right that shouldn't be violated. If you look at the Fourth Amendment, Judge, Fourth Amendment states that you need a warrant to actually search someone, and reasonable suspicion is unconstitutional due to the fact that you don't need a warrant.
Okay, then 2 things. First, if it's unconstitutional, why do we have it implemented since the TLO case in 1985? And second is, look, Judge, if we do some simple impact calculus, we know that lives are the most important thing in the debate. We have to save the most lives, and if they're proving that some privacy is being violated, even though it's not, you're automatically going to have to vote for us because look at our statistics. We proved that people are losing their lives because of drug usage, cyberbullying, because of depression. People are losing their lives, but they don't say anything about any statistical figures, any concept of how privacy is going to kill people, and they're saying this is important for the constitutional rights. It doesn't make sense.
Okay, first of all, we could save lives with the probable cause because probable cause is more efficient actually because it uses a warrant and they actually have the evidence to go against to arrest
So-
someone, and also it promotes the rule of law because it doesn't hurt minorities, because reasonable search, you can search anyone and it's targeted towards the minorities.
Okay, but minorities aren't being killed like cyberbullying and drug usage. I mean, seriously, thousands of people dying annually because of drugs and cyberbullying. Just because some minorities are discriminated, it doesn't mean that probable cause isn't going to do that. It's going to do the same thing. I mean, seriously, go back before the TLO case. Kids were still discriminated even though they were black in 1985. So in this case, it doesn't prove that you're not discriminating people. And not to mention, it's still not saving lives. And it doesn't violate the Constitution because we're implementing it right now. Do you want to ask a question?
Oh yeah, sure. You said about how in your contention that student anonymous tips are useful, but how can we trust anonymous tips if they could be just a prank call?
Prank? Well, we're talking about this in school. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
a prank call.
You can anonymously tip someone like as a prank.
No, it's not a prank because if it's anonymous, they can actually go to that person, like the principal, and they can say, this person is bullying this person, I think you have to talk about this.
Oh, if they're anonymous, also they could hide their identity, allowing them to do whatever they want. Correct?
Okay, first of all, what's the chances of this happening just because it's a prank? I mean, you could easily get caught. I mean, seriously, school's been established for maybe like 30 or 40 years in modern 21st century, and I mean, just because we have some pranks in the classroom doesn't mean that we're gonna do it. I mean, they know the consequences of if you prank someone. It's because anonymous tips are so useful, like we proved right here, that it's actually stopping these suicide rates if we go with reasonable suspicion. And you still don't prove how probable cause, how reasonable suspicion is actually violating the Constitution, yet more probable cause is actually saving lives.
Time. I'd like to take a little bit of prep time to look at their subpoint B regarding
Yeah, that's fine. We just start
power.
from-
Okay.
starting now.
Wait, can we start when they give it? Oh, okay. They just give it to you.
Okay.
Okay, we'll stop prep there.
Use 6 seconds.
Okay, before I begin, I'd like to provide you with a brief off-time roadmap. I'll be addressing their framework and just going straight down the flow with their contentions. Everyone ready?
Yep.
Let's start time now. Start at the top of their floor. They're going to bring to you this framework regarding the need for human rights. Don't weigh this over human lives because you can't have rights without lives. That's going to take the most importance in today's debate. But remember that none of this even matters if they don't fulfill their burden to prove feasibility, because after that, remember, there's no response to this. And if they don't prove that probable cause is feasible, they can't even get the benefits, let alone quantify them. That being said, let's go to their first contention regarding student lives. Their first subpoint here is going to be student rights. And this isn't going to matter for a couple of reasons. First, reasonable suspicion doesn't violate students' privacy. Benjamin Tiller of St. Louis University Law School argues, quote, students in school do not possess the same breadth of constitutional rights as parties in other settings. Students' constitutional rights in schools are limited by the circumstances of the school's special environment. Reasonable suspicion standard is entirely consistent with other constitutional rights that students enjoy. It will not provide a slippery slope or erode students' rights. This is going to be really important because, second, you never see this empirically. We've had reasonable suspicion for the past 50 years, and we never see constitutional rights going on a slippery slope. Right there, you should drop their entire impact for that. But then, even if you don't buy this, turn this entire argument against them, because probable cause actually harms the rule of law. By requiring a warrant, police will have to get involved and carry out the search instead of a student. And remember that, third, this isn't a big deal. Students' privacy is constantly being violated via social media and overbearing parents. One school search, as long as an administrator has reasonable suspicion, will not collapse their privacy rights. But then remember that none of this matters because, fourth, no violation of privacy is a check for safety. Such a standard would apply to student searches as well. Flying with Fish explains the precedent. US v. Davis goes on to state that an administrative search is allowed if no more intrusive or intensive measures are taken than necessary. In light of current technology to detect weapons or explosives, we simply have to do it in good faith. That being said, let's go on to their second subpoint where they're going to talk to you about power. This is going to be really important because their evidence never specifically mentions school searches, nor does it say that anything was intentional. All they tell you is that there was no search, documents were leaked. It was an accident. This doesn't go to prove power at all. Not to mention that they give you no impact for this argument other than the privacy impact that we've already addressed. That being said, we can go on to their second contention regarding the distrust of authority. And this contention as a whole shouldn't stand for a couple of reasons. First, this argument is non-unique. Students will still experience police abuse outside of school and lose trust in authority figures if they want to. Switching to a probable cause standard changes nothing. College and education fellow Andrew Syox initiates, quote, college students staged demonstrations across the nation Tuesday after grand jury decided not to indict Ferguson, Missouri police officer who shot Michael Brown, an unarmed teenager, at schools like New York University, the University of Pennsylvania, Georgetown University, the University of Carolina, and Berkeley. Students joined ongoing city protests. Students began their own protests at other campuses. At Ohio University, students have occupied Baker University's Classic Center. The University of Maryland protested police militarization on their own campus. Remember that students don't see all of this just in schools, so this isn't going to matter. Second, even if you're not buying my first response, turn this entire argument against them because probable cause actually harms the rule of law. It leads to an increase of distrust of authority. By requiring a warrant, police will have to get involved and carry out the search instead of a teacher. So by voting AF, all you're doing is causing more interactions by police and students and getting more students thrown in jail. After this, third, probable cause doesn't prove solvency. School administrators can use a loophole in the probable cause system to search students without warrant. This is done through the hot pursuit standard. The Farlek Legal Dictionary exemplifies hot pursuit as, quote, the Supreme Court stated that hot pursuit in United States v. Santana in 1976, the court has recognized warrantless searches under the rule of hot pursuit. And this hot pursuit standard is going to be really important because as soon as you see a probable cause standard being implemented, teachers are going to argue in court that what they did was under hot pursuit, it was under good faith, which is protected by United States v. White, and they're going to get away with these searches. All you're doing is making it harder for us to use anonymous tips, for us to catch people who want to commit mass violence and people who do drugs. And for these reasons and more, we strongly urge a con ballot. Thank you.
Quick question. Can we use a little bit of prep time? Can I see your card on deterrence?
Sure. Which one? We have
The one that states the evidence for deterrence, basically.
All right. Deterrence would be right
Okay.
here.
Starting prep now.
Right there. There are 3 cards.
All right, that's it.
Okay. 1 second.
Okay then. Any specific notes you want me to do? No. All time. Cool. Okay, so actually, before I like to begin, I like to give a quick off-time roadmap. I'll just bring over.
I need to take like 2 seconds. I'm just finishing writing one thing down.
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay.
All right, so before we begin, I'd like to provide a quick off-time roadmap. So essentially what I'll be doing is I'll first be arguing with their definitions and framework, then I'll just be going down the flow and responding to all their speeches. So with that in mind, is everyone ready?
Yep.
All right, please start now. First of all, we need to argue with definitions and framework. Their definition about feasibility is wrong. Ought is by the definition of the English language a moral obligation. The definition of a word that ties, and this definition of the word ties into human rights. The ought is a moral obligation, and it's a moral obligation to provide students' rights and provide privacy and provide all the rights a person deserves to have. With that in mind, we agree that ought should include feasibility, but only in the scope of human rights, and as well as the fact that it's under moral obligation. Next, we'd like to go over their first argument about student safety. One, anonymous tips do not solve. Ties into distrust. Students being treated badly under the current system will not want to give anonymous tips. Keep in mind, Judge, there is no reason for a student that has been treated badly to give help. 2, anonymous tips are not reliable. Pranks always exist, and also keep in mind this has happened before. Anonymity is frankly quite evil in some cases. The school shooting that happened in Oregon was done on an anonymous site where someone gave fair warning and it still didn't work. The school shooting still happened, people still died, and at the end of the day, nothing changed. So clearly, anonymous tips are not important. Now, be in their argument about drugs. 1, turn this argument because random drug testing does not reduce drug use and actually encourages students to do even more dangerous drugs. The deterrent argument has been proved incorrect. The more someone is told to do something, the more they will do it. Washington Post noted that numerous studies have shown little evidence of effectiveness, and a 2013 study found that school drug testing was associated with moderately low marijuana usage, but increased the use of other more dangerous drugs. A 2014 study concluded that drug testing was not associated with changes in substance use. Furthermore, data released by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration indicates that 12-year-old kids are more likely to get high from common, legal legal household substances than use cigarettes or marijuana. And 2, it harms education. Random drug tests destroy trust, harming students' education. According to Celia, Vermont, random drug testing in schools does not reduce student substance use. The study found students who attend schools where they feel treated with respect are less likely to start smoking cigarettes or marijuana. Romer found students attending a school with positive school climates were 15% less likely to start smoking cigarettes and 20% less likely less likely to start using marijuana. Next, we're going to go over their cyberbullying argument. Okay. One is that cell phone searches will only lead to more harassment and cyberbullying. According to Naomi Harlan Goodnow, some students indicated that when they reported cyberbullying incidents to teachers, these conversations were not confidential and resulted in additional retaliatory harassment. Cross-applies to what they said in the crossfire. They can't not do this anonymously. It has to be anonymously or else they'll feel harassed, and we've already proven that anonymity does not work. 2, multiple new solutions are dealing with cyberbullies. Naomi Smith writes in CBS News, the social network We Heart is designed to prevent an experience like Samantha's. It allows users to share photos, but no one can post comments. Identity protection program MetLife Defender offers a service that monitors a child's online accounts for abusive content. And the U.S. Department of Education, of all people, unveiled a new app called Willing to help parents spot warning signs and talk to their children. Stop It takes a different approach. It enables children to take a screenshot of a harassing post, picture, or text message and anonymously send it to a trusted adult. And 3, no impact. Even if law enforcement does get its hands on someone's phone, there are measures that people will put into place to make sure their phones are secure. For example, apps that lock your messaging app and need you to unlock it, access to access your messages exist. And even then, there's still encryption, which essentially guarantees a hard lock on someone's phone. So at the end of the day, cyberbullying argument is completely dead. Next, we're going to go over this deterrence argument. Now, first, you're going to have to cross-apply this argument to the first response of our drug arguments. Remember, the Washington Post notes, deterrence does not work. Remember, school drug testing associated with moderately low marijuana usage increased the use of more dangerous drugs and was not associated with changes in substance use. Turn this argument because at the end of the day, we have proof saying that deterrence does not work. Now for the impact of preventing violence, and they say that it's impossible, but again, this is a logical fallacy. We can still at least alleviate the problem by helping. Finally, for their third contention about infeasible, remember, school budget stretch does not relate to the government. The government creates laws and it enforces them. If the government says we're going to use probable cause, it provides schools everywhere with police officers. That's a fact. A budget does not relate to what the government does and the government's actions. With this in mind, at the end of the day, you must vote AF, otherwise you are essentially creating a society that violates human rights, destroys education, and makes all students worse off. Thank you.
Before we start our crossfire, I'd like to see the card that they have for Colorado, the anonymous tip regarding the shooting.
Yeah, that'll be taking time out of prep.
Yeah,
Well, it's a historical fact.
it's not a fact unless you can give me evidence on that.
But it happened. That's
Do
like
you have
saying,
a card or no? He
well,
wants to see
no,
it.
because
Okay, well then,
it's
is
common
there anything
knowledge.
You want to see?
No.
Okay, then
All right.
let's start with crossfire.
All right. Let's start time now. Do you have any card that tells me that ought means a moral argumentation?
well, no, because that's the definition of the English language.
That unless you can give me a Merriam-Webster dictionary definition, you should go with Mizrahi because he has credible sources in this instance.
Okay, even if you're talking about feasibility, okay, even assuming your point about feasibility is correct, shouldn't something, I don't know, like the fact that students are having their rights violated be more important than someone's dictionary definition?
No, it shouldn't. Because the second that he tells you their rights are being violated, he's talking in the sense of an adult. Students are not adults, they are children, especially in the public K-12 school system. And this is going to be really important because Benjamin Tiller tells you that they don't have the same rights as adults.
Okay, first of all, that's completely wrong. We have cards. It states in the status quo. There was a girl, for instance, that was forced to be under a strip search of all things, and that was in the status quo. We have.
Okay, that doesn't matter because strip searches were rendered unconstitutional a couple of years ago by the Supreme Court. The fact that you bring that up doesn't mean that they exist right now in the status quo. We only have the burden to prove that the current status quo.
But that still means that under the status quo, this kind of power can be exerted. That's our whole point about our argument about power and corruption.
Yeah, you can say that under the current system, under any system, people can murder each other. That doesn't mean there's not consequences. But people commit wrongdoing that's going to happen under a probable cause as well. In fact, it will happen more under a probable cause because teachers don't know which warrant to use, how to apply for a warrant, how to properly do probable cause. Okay. You're not winning anything.
Okay, I'm fairly sure there's something called government training that allows people to,
yeah, the government training that costs $23 billion.
Or government training that the government funds for itself. Obviously, that's why it's called government training.
And according to page 21, rule number 4 of the NSDA rulebook, that's a counterplan. He's telling you exactly where government money should be spent. It should be spent on training these people, these people, and these people, and that's against public forum rules. Don't let him make this argument.
Okay, actually, let me make this argument. That rule packet applied specifically to the Nationals tournament. That was this year.
This is the public forum rulebook. If you don't follow the public forum rules...
Can you provide me with the rulebook then?
Yes, I can. If you want, we can stake the debate on it, and I can show you the rulebook.
Okay.
Do you have a question, or may I ask another?
All right. I have a question.
All right.
So, are you telling me that you want to create a system in which people's privacy and power, those two things, by the way, that determines how someone lives, you're creating a system that's going to be violated?
No, I'm not. What I'm telling you is we're going to stop drug usage, stop mass violence, stop the Columbine shootings, the Newtown shootings that are killing people,
Okay.
and that's not going to be at the expense of any human rights, because the Constitution gives rights only to adults above the age of 18.
Really?
That doesn't follow in the
So
resolution of public K-12 schools.
So you're telling me that in the Constitution there's a specific little line that says, oh, by the way, this does not apply to people. under 18.
Actually, the New Jersey v. TLO case made by the Supreme Court, which determines the Constitution, which shows what the Constitution means, determined that. So yes, there is essentially a little disclaimer that says unless you're 18, you can't have these rights.
Fair enough then.
Do you have a question, or may I ask another?
We have 5 seconds left.
All right. Yeah, 1 minute. Okay. Let's start prep. I got it.
I'm ready.
Oh.
40 seconds. Okay. Okay, is opponents ready?
Yes.
Partner. Okay. Yeah, the
Okay, now.
Okay, are we ready?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Well, quick real-time roadmap. Oh, sorry. Quick real-time roadmap. I'm gonna answer their response to our feasibility argument, and then I'm gonna respond to responses. Okay. You have to vote for the content because there's so many flaws in the responses to our contentions. First, we talk about student safety, which is basically saying anonymous tips, drugs, and cyberbullying is killing so many people, and yet Pro doesn't really prove this Pro doesn't really prove this because they're only making responses such as, first they said for feasibility, they said ought is a moral, we said ought is a moral obligation, and but then they also said ought is a human right. However, human rights don't kill people, which what we're advocating for. So in this case, you actually have to vote for us because we're saving lives. Now they also make the argument for saying number one, it does not solve, but it does solve. Remember, anonymous tips, as was shown, has proven from Reader Mazzani evidence, which has it stopped 23 suicide attacks and 20 a bunch of other school shootings. And also for anonymous tips are not reliable. Again, there's evidence which said that it stopped 23 suicide interventions, which they don't provide any evidence on the Colorado school shooting or something like that. So in this case, don't believe their evidence. It's flawed. We provide you evidence where it stopped 23 suicide interventions where kids bought guns and tried to kill people, but it didn't happen because of anonymous tips. And their third argument was encourages drug use. However, it actually doesn't, because drug testing randomly in kids is actually more effective because when most kids smoke marijuana, so it's in their system for days. After that, the kids won't know whether or not drug testing is going to happen, so it's very scary for them. So they're not going to smoke weed or do any other drugs because they can have random school checks and still check if it's in their system, which is going to deter kids from actually doing that, which also goes to our second contention, deterrence. Their final response to this was that random drug tests also create distrust, but actually no, because students will actually feel safe that drugs aren't going to be in their school. Remember, drugs are a very scary thing if you're doing meth or other things, and even weed, it decreases your mental capacity, so kids can obviously be scared by harder drugs and weed. And it's also creating a very safe environment. I'm also dropping my second contention for deterrence, but we're gonna give greater weight on infeasibility. Remember in our beginning, that school budgets can't even provide any money on SROs. Remember the government said that the government can use laws and give police officers. However, one thing they have to know is that SROs have to be privately bought by schools, which costs $23 billion, which we provided you with sufficient evidence. So for these reasons, we outweigh everything because we save lives, anonymous tips, drugs, cyberbullying, and infeasibility, which they can't solve. So at this rate, you have to vote for us because we're saving the most lives at the end of the day. Thank you.
I would like to take prep time.
Give me 1 second. I think
Yeah,
I'm time.
but it's not too bad.
Okay.
Don't start. Okay, you ready?
It's gonna be quick. Yes.
Starting fresh.
Okay. Ready.
You have 140.
Judge, just a quick time roadmap, if everyone's ready.
Yes.
Okay. My quick, first I would like to respond to my opponent's response to our framework and go to respond to my opponent's response against our contention. Everyone ready? Okay, my framework was stating about human rights and how human rights are a basic need of every human being. My opponent responded with human lives are important, but human rights saves lives because we allow people to fight against oppression for those in power. Moving on to my first contention, students' lives matter. Students' rights are the most important, but my opponent responded with not important. But then they are because they are our future, and if our future is not bright, that means that our we as a society cannot progress. My opponent responded also with by harm's rule of law because police are involved, but not really because police have actual evidence to go against the student, and they said students' privacy is violated, but they are when they're using social media, they're voluntarily giving up their social privacy, so that doesn't really count. And they said no evidence, but for our power, but it's just common sense, and we already listed you the case that it has already happened. Moving on to my second contention, which is distrust of authority. They said this argument is not unique because police image is bad outside the school, but we can prove to those students that, the good image of police when we use actual evidence, not just hunting down anyone. They said probable cause harms the rule of law because police are involved. Like I said, it doesn't really harm rule of law because police are using actual evidence. They say that there's loopholes that teachers take advantage of the students, but there won't be because teachers would be educated and they need evidence of that student to go against them. So if you vote for us, you're saving students' lives because we're not making every student a possible potential threat to the school. Thank you.
Yes. Ready?
Oh, are you? Let's start time now. So walk me through exactly how you're saving lives of students if you give them human rights.
Okay, allow me to explain like this. Human right. Okay, let me picture it like this. If you were treated in North Korea, you had no rights. You couldn't you couldn't do anything, basically. Would you want to live? Probably not. While the situation is not as drastic, the whole point is students' lives matter on students' rights. Keep in mind this happens. If I have the right not to be searched, and I don't get searched, nothing will happen to my life. Suppose someone who's young and foolish at the time decides to hoard marijuana. That's a bad crime. But if they're... This is a bad example.
Well,
Okay.
May I respond to that?
Yeah.
Well, two things is that first, that's a bit illogical because if you look at history right now, you don't see students just being arrested because of student rights or something like that. Most kids don't even know the difference between probable cause or reasonable suspicion. So in this case, they're not going to argue about that, and most kids still have rights. I mean, you don't see having the freedom of speech being taken away. You don't have the freedom of religion being practiced. It's just at school where you shouldn't give religious beliefs. You shouldn't have bad hate speech in school. That's just the basic rights that you have to keep and adhere in school. Changing one warrant for that isn't going to violate their privacy. But if you compare that with our lives arguments, where you're saying that that you're saving students' lives, you're harming you're making them do drugs. You're providing anonymous tips to stop school shootings. This is far more important than just some privacy arguments, which they don't even impact that much.
Okay,
I don't
first
think you
of all-
understand the thing about rights. Without rights, people don't want to live, and without rights, people's lives are put in greater threat.
Wait,
All right,
wait,
so wait. By the same standard, shouldn't we be letting kids drink alcohol? Shouldn't we be letting them vote at age 2? Because if you're telling me that students, kindergartners through 12th graders, have all the same rights as adults, and if we take away one right, we're taking away them all.
Yeah.
Then shouldn't they be able to vote? Shouldn't they be able to drink
there
alcohol?
are some rights that restrict to a
Oh, so
certain
you're the one that
age.
gets to choose which rights
No, not
can
really.
and cannot
Okay,
be
if you
given.
look at
Can you bring a specific
alcohol,
case
it's
in
a,
which-
if you look at alcohol, it's a bad example because obviously alcohol for young children is a bad thing.
And
Okay,
so is
look.
school searches, because giving them way too much power and not keeping a school a safe environment for tomorrow's leaders isn't really going to do
Well,
much.
And
to
can you
Well,
bring a
it's
specific
not
piece
right.
of evidence or events that says that because of reasonable suspicion that students are being killed?
Well,
Can you please bring up a piece of
well,
evidence? Or you can't prove that because that's just attempt. It's a moral attempt to that's saying like, oh no, if this happens, this could happen. But if this doesn't prove, because since 1985 TLO case enacted this act and no students have been killed, then it's obviously proving that students aren't being killed and their rights aren't being violated. Well, we are proving this because we have evidence from that.
Guess what? We can still save lives because we have the police that have evidence to track down.
Don't
those
buy this
people.
one size fit all argument. All he's doing is telling you, oh, okay, students' rights, we're going to give them one specific right, and somehow that's going to stop violence, that's going to stop murder, that's going to stop drugs, and it's going to make the world a magical place, when it's not.
Okay, A, by extension, you could just flip that argument and say, okay, by restricting them as one right, we'll make everything magical and we'll make everything solved. And B, let's actually move on to the argument of police. Would you rather have a teacher who's a teacher?
That's time.
Oh, can I finish my sentence? Or? All right.
Lives. Doesn't matter.
It's time.
Okay.
Before I begin, I'd like to provide you with a brief off-time roadmap. I will first be addressing the framework and burdens. I will then be going on to address my own voters and then talk about my opponents. Everyone ready?
Yes.
Let's start time now. At the end of the day, we shouldn't be implementing a probable cause system for a couple of reasons. First, let's start off with the ought feasibility argument that we made at the very beginning of the round. The only thing they've told you thus far is moral obligation. Remember that they don't back this up in their summary speech, so you shouldn't buy it right here. But then again, they don't give you definitions for this. We obviously have a stronger argument because we're going to give you the Mizrachi definition. Thus, right there, if they don't prove feasibility, they can't win the round. They can't even quantify their benefits. But then after that, we look to this framework. All they're going to tell you is that we need human rights. We need human rights. Remember that first, students don't have the same human rights because it was established in the TLO case. Remember that they don't have any response to this. All they're saying is students need to be equal to adults. They're not. After that, even if you don't buy that, remember that lives are going to be much more important than the need for human rights, because you can't have human rights, you can't have a constitution without having lives in the first place. That being said, let's go to the two voters in today's debate. The first voter is going to be our anonymous tip subpoint regarding student safety. This is going to be really important because remember that anonymous tips are not available under a probable cause, and that's going to be really harmful because 28 mass shootings are prevented the second that you implement anonymous tips. The only thing they've said here is there could be pranks. They don't have any evidence of this, and in addition, they aren't going to tell you anything that's going to be worthwhile in their one response. After that, we go on to their the next voter in this round, which is going to be infeasibility. This ties back to the contention because you see that right now they can't prove anything because their only response to infeasibility was not valid under public forum rules because they told you we're going to implement a counterplan. This is going to be really important because if we win infeasibility, not only do they lose the entire debate, we can't have probable cause to have their contentions to begin with. After that, let's move on to their arguments. First, they're going to tell you that student lives are going to matter. Remember that they don't respond to the Farlex legal dictionary and the WEX card that we provide you. Remember that the same problems occur under a probable cause system because of good faith and hot pursuit. But even if you don't buy that, remember that they're not going to respond to the turn argument in this contention regarding the probable cause not solving for hot pursuit. After that, remember that they don't have any evidence that pertains to searches for their power contention, and then for distrust authority, they don't prove hot pursuit again. For these reasons and more, we strongly urge a con ballot. Thank you.
Anyway, I'll begin my speech. So before I begin, I'd like to give a quick off-time roadmap. First, I'll just be going over framework and the definitions, then I'll just be going over voting issues and responding. So with that in mind,
Let me roll my timer.
yeah, just in case.
Yeah, good.
Just in case, let me pull up mine too, not to repeat anything. Okay, where are you? All right, 2 minutes on the clock. Starting in 3, 2, 1. First of all, we need to look at this debate and we need to look at the framework and the definitions. Remember, human rights determine human lives. We've already proven this before and they have no response to this, meaning that human lives and human rights are effectively one and the same. Therefore, the framework still agrees with ours, and as for the ought equals obligation thing, remember, even if they choose to use the feasibility argument, this still works because these plans are very much still feasible. Now let's move on to the voting issues. Our first voting issue is distrust of authority. Remember, the key point here is if you help students and you treat them well, they will help you with the law. Students are willing to cooperate if treated well. Remember that this mitigates all of their impacts because if students are willing to cooperate, they will be giving more anonymous tips. Even if you buy their argument about anonymous tips, they'll be willing to do less drugs, they'll be willing to do anything less and more, and therefore treating students well will minimize all the bad impacts. Next are voting issues about privacy. Remember, privacy is a fundamental right. Without privacy, you can't have a good life. Now, rights determine lives, as we've already stated. If you're not going to give people privacy, if you're not going to let people live as they want, they're not going to help you. They will not respect you. Judge, keep in mind, you can't have people agreeing with the law if they don't even get treated well by the law. So keep that in mind further on in this debate. Now we're going to go into their arguments. Their first voting issue was about the anonymous speech. Remember, we've shown you before the Oregon shooting worked. And guess what? It was on 4chan, an anonymous website. This is a fundamental fact. You don't need to pull out a textbook. Just like we know World War II was a fact and we know the American Revolution was a fact, this happened and it was on the website that was anonymous. So anonymous tips clearly do not work. And still, they can still exist in probable cause anyway. Even if you buy their argument about them being beneficial, they can still exist in probable cause. There's no specific barrier. Next, we're going to go on to their argument about feasibility. This is still feasible anyway, and there's no real fundamental basis. They claim that it's against the rules and they need money to do this. But keep in mind, things are changing. Governments make laws. Governments provide what they need. If probable cause is implemented in schools worldwide, there will be police officers and will be all the things that they need because of the government's obligation to help. Finally, let's go over the drugs argument. They did not respond at all to our evidence from the Washington Post that states that it does not work. So actually turn the drugs argument. The drugs argument and all its impacts are now on the pro team because we've proven before that drugs deterrence does not work. With that in mind, that's why we should vote AF for a country with rights and with privacy and with dignity to live. Thank you.